fog is no longer accurate.
And Captain Morwood didn't get the forecast of freezing rain coming into Dryden, which he should have had.
As Flight 1363 lands in Dryden, the weather was getting worse by the minute. The plane sat there for half an hour while snow built up on the wings.
I gotta talk to somebody about this.
Investigators may never know how concerned Morwood was about the weather. But there is evidence that it was on his mind. When Roa questions the fueling agent, he learns that Morwood did ask about de-icing moments before takeoff.
Is there de-icing available?
The fueling agent says he pointed out the de-icing ground crew to Morwood. The agent then offers a compelling reason that could explain why the captain didn't de-ice. Air Ontario had a policy prohibiting him from de-icing with an engine running.
The fluid can be ingested in the engines and then find its way from there to the air conditioning on the airplane and make it extremely noxious in the cabin portion of the airplane.
But if Morwood had shut down both engines, he wouldn't have been able to restart his plane.
Now, the only other way to start the airplane on the ground is with a ground-based air cart that can provide the compressed air. And Dryden did not have the capability to start the airplane.
The equipment would have had to be flown in from Winnipeg. It would have been a costly decision.
If he shut it down, he would ground the aircraft there effectively, requiring the billeting of passengers and hotels and at an expense to the airline for which he would be answerable.
Right. So now what?
So he was under a great deal of pressure.
No. You figure it out.
And I believe that the conversation on the phone would have been about that scenario and his displeasure with it. But he didn't have any other chance.
It's getting worse. What's the latest?
Quite heavy snow. Looks like it's going to be a bad one. It's still within our takeoff limits.
Well, that's good. We got a lot of people who want to make the connectors. Let's hope it holds.
Though the amount of snow on the wings was still within limits, it's what lay under the snow that doomed the flight. The fuel in a plane's wing can get as cold as minus 40 degrees Celsius. The frigid fuel cools the metal surface of the wing. When snow hits this supercooled surface, it freezes instantly into a barely visible layer of ice. It's a process called cold soaking.
And this, of course, is what's disrupting the airflow on the wing and destroying the lifting capabilities.
Tell them we're going immediately.
Kenora, Ontario, we're taxiing out at this time, 360.
The only reason that I can possibly think of that led to his decision to execute the takeoff was the fact that he didn't consider the cold soaking phenomena and the fact that those wings could still have ice on them.
Advise Kenora, we're ready to proceed.
And Kenora, Dryden, Ontario.
Perhaps not wanting to face the consequences of shutting down his engines, Morwood opted to take off for Winnipeg without de-icing his plane.
He must have concluded that the ice would blow off on takeoff. That is where he made a mistake, a tragic mistake.
But Mashansky concludes that despite his mistake, Captain Morwood is not solely responsible for the crash.
It wasn't simply pilot error. There were myriad of factors which were the cause of the accident.
One of the most important factors, Air Ontario's decision to let the plane fly with a broken APU.
They were deferring a lot of the maintenance that should have been done because of a shortage of parts. And then they had to scrounge around all across Canada with various F-28 operators to borrow parts from them. And this was a very bad move on the part of Air Ontario management.
The investigation determines that by cutting corners and focusing too much on the bottom line, the airline was putting all their passengers and employees at risk.
Because the F-28s were new to Air Ontario, there was this urgency to get one crew off and get the next crew on flying. This urgency to have them in the air producing money.
I
came to the conclusion after a lot of thought about this accident that there were a lot of other hands on those throttles, pushing those throttles forward. There were a lot of people that were involved in the sequence of events that led to this tragic outcome.
This was a preventable accident, but everything conspired against the pilots.
I gotta talk to somebody about this.
Because Air Ontario management did not have a safety culture. And you have to have a safety culture from the top management down.
Knowing there are dozens of Fokker F-28s flying around the world, Justice Mashansky takes an unusual step. He releases a report well before his inquiry concludes.
Good afternoon.
It warns of the plane's vulnerability to ice buildup and stresses the need for frequent de-icing in winter conditions.
Even a small amount of icing would be disastrous on an F-28.
But 15 months later, it becomes clear that Mashansky's warnings have not been heard. US Air Flight 405 is preparing to fly from New York to Cleveland on March the 22nd, 1992. The plane is a Fokker F-28, and it's snowing. It's 1 degree below freezing. At 9 p.m., the jet is being de-iced for a second time since its arrival from Florida. In the past hour, an inch of snow has fallen and shows no signs of stopping.
US Air 405, clear to taxi runway 13.
The crew prepares for takeoff. Flight 405 is an hour and 45 minutes behind schedule when Captain Wallace Majeur starts taxiing to runway 13. Then, unexpectedly,
US Air 405, turn left and hold short of Echo.
Left on the inner to hold short of Echo.
At 9:07 p.m., Flight 405 is forced to wait on the taxiway near runway 13. Another 23 minutes pass. First Officer John Rashuba turns on a light that illuminates his wings. He checks the right wing for ice. He sees none.
Looks pretty good to me as far as I can see.
US Air 405, runway 13, clear for takeoff.
Even though it's now been 35 minutes since their last de-icing, the crew does not request another.
Takeoff thrusts set. Temp's okay.
Everything proceeds as it should. Until...
V1. Rotate.
Just after the F-28 begins its rotation.
The aircraft had enough flying speed to lift off. Barely lift off. The wings just could not support the airplane. They knew they were in trouble.
13 seconds after lifting off, Flight 405 crashes on the shore of Flushing Bay.
I don't think any pilot really thinks he's going to crash. They were trying to save the airplane right to the end.
27 of the 51 people on board are killed. Another Fokker F-28 has crashed, with tragic consequences.
My reaction when I heard about it was, my God, it's Dryden all over again.
Within days, investigator in charge Robert Benson suspects that ice on the wings was the major cause.
It would be very, very difficult for either of the pilots to really detect ice on the wings, looking backwards over their shoulder.